extreme pleasure to have you all here. Just a few words. I'm Allison Lamb, and I'm the GreenTalks coordinator for this VGM Phase 2. I know that there was already an official opening earlier in the policy track, but it would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I am calling from Treaty 13 lands. They're the traditional territories of the Wendat peoples, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I am very, very excited to bring GreenTalks to you here today because your fellow Greens have worked so hard to put this amazing program together. Over the next 3 days, you're going to hear from expert speakers, fantastic presentations, open discussions, workshops, and a variety of different topics that are really important to Greens. The speakers that you're going to have are going to be so passionate about the subjects they're going to talk about, and it's going to be an amazing few days. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. I am going to turn the mic over to our very, very first speaker, who really, among Greens, needs very little introduction. He was one of the candidates in our last leadership race. Anyone who's ever met him has known him to be friendly, kind, brilliant, an amazingly charming person, and just incredibly passionate about our party. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. David Murner.
Thanks very much, Allison. I really appreciate that beautiful introduction. Very hard to live up to. I am just going to start my video. Here we go. That worked. And others will be asked to start their videos as well. And thank you, Allison, for all you've done to get us to this point in starting this GreenTalks panel on a pathway to electoral reform. Bienvenue à notre panel. Entretien vert concernant une voie plus sûre vers la réforme électorale. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Esquimalt, the Wasanic, the Sauk First Nations. We're in the territories of the Pacheedaht as well, where the Fairy Creek logging protests have been happening. It's a beautiful sunny day here on South Vancouver Island. And I'm just going to start by introducing our two key participants in this panel, and then we'll get going. First of all, Kathy Hartman is going to handle the questions and answers. Kathy lives in Kootenay, in the Kootenay Mountains of British Columbia, the spectacular, stunning Kootenay Mountains of BC. She's worked as a volunteer in many federal and provincial Green campaigns. She's been a proud supporter of Fair Vote Canada for many years, and she is convinced that one day she will get to vote by proportional representation in her lifetime. Way to go, Kathy. I hope you're right and that it's in my lifetime too. Our keynote speaker, our star of the show is Réal Lavergne. He's coming to us from Ottawa. Welcome, Réal. I first knew Réal on the board of Fair Vote Canada. He was a longtime president of Fair Vote Canada. He is one of Canada's very top experts on electoral reform. And what I really love about Réal is he's not just gifted with a deep academic understanding of proportional representation, but he's got a very practical political sense of how we can get it done. And so without further ado, I'm going to say thank you to Kathy and Réal for stepping up on this panel. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Réal, for your presentation, followed by questions and answers. Are you there, Réal?
I've now got my audio. I've been shut off, and my video is still shut off. So it'll take Allison to put it back on.
Cool. And I can hear you, so that's great. And did you miss that lovely introduction of you that I just made?
No, I got it. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate that.
Are you okay just to start? We'll sort out the video problem, but you need the video for the PowerPoint slides, right?
Well, I have my video, and what I'm going to do now is I will share my screen.
Perfect. That's great.
And that'll push everybody to the side a little bit.
By my count, we have 25 participants, so it's so great that people are coming on.
Yeah, that's
Over to
great.
you.
And
Yeah.
the fact that it's going to be taped means that other people can share share the material later on. No problem. So what I want to talk about today is not your usual PR 101 kind of session. It's not about the pros and cons of proportional representation and what's wrong with first past the post. It's much more with how to get there. We've been working in Canada for about 100 years. Fair Vote Canada has not been going around for 100 years, but it's been close to 25. But there have been electoral reform initiatives going on for about 100 years, and yet we still do not have proportional representation. So the real big question is how to make that transition, and what are some of the ways that can be considered to do that. I've been involved in a large number of campaigns since I joined Fair Vote Canada in 2013. I've been involved in 4 federal elections, 215, 219, 221. Actually, that's 3. Actively involved in the Quebec campaign and actively involved also in what's going on in Ontario. And often what I'm doing is I'm taking a multi-partisan perspective on this. And I think one gets particular insights from that. Personally, I think we're not going to get proportional representation unless we have the support, ideally from one of the major parties, or at the very least, buy in to a process that hands things over to citizens to make recommendations. And that's where I think we have more of a chance than advocating directly through just let's elect our friends or allies, and then they will just pass it and we'll have proportional representation. That's the model we've been trying to follow, and which has simply not worked until now. So if you look at this first slide here, then it's what it's about. And I'm going to talk about 2 generic theories of change. The first one I call the promise and deliver model of change. And I would say that's the dominant one that we've been working, that's the theory of change we've been working with for the main part. And the second one I call a citizens-based approach. And that's basically the centerpiece is the call that the Green Party has been doing and that Fair Vote Canada has been doing and some others as well for a citizens assembly. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is so significant. And I want to talk also about how that whole idea has to be enriched a little bit more. I don't think it's sufficient to say rah rah for citizens assembly. Let's have a citizens assembly. We need to go that one step. So it's that one extra step is where I'm hoping there'll be some value added from this presentation. So first of all, then a little recap on advocacy for electoral reform in this country. And I was saying most of our efforts have been about a legislative approach to electoral reform. So we're focusing on the fact that electoral reform has to be passed in the legislature or it's not going to happen. And that is true. Unfortunately, that approach has not necessarily worked very well for us, not at all. But the idea, what do we do? What kind of advocacy do? Well, we support the yes side in referendums. We've done this 7 times now, 3 times in BC, 3 times in PEI, and the one in Ontario. We would have had one in Quebec if the government hadn't simply decided to do a Trudeau and just renege on its promise in Quebec in the end. We had a strong level of engagement in the ERRE process. That includes the NDP, the Green Party, the CAQ, and Fair Vote Canada, and supporters right across the country. And the idea was to come up with recommendations that the government could then legislate and bring in proportional representation at the end of the day. We've worked to endorse pro-PR candidates and parties. You've seen Fair Vote Canada do that in several elections starting in 2015. And then in 2021, there was a group that I chaired called the One Time Alliance. Some of you may know me from that initiative, which was calling for a multi-partisan approach involving the NDP and the Greens, trying to overcome the disadvantage of first past the post by working together so that at least the Greens and the NDP wouldn't be splitting the vote, and trying to win as many as 15 or 20 more seats for the 2 parties together using that approach. So those are some of the approaches that have been taken within the existing system. The second approach revolves around a different idea, which is that really the ball should be handed over to some sort of citizens process. We call it a citizens assembly. Wouldn't have to be a citizens assembly necessarily in the conventional sense of it, but the idea is elections belong to citizens it's not up to politicians to be making the decisions. We need the politicians in order to legislate the changes, but it should be citizens themselves who get to say what it is that they want. So, whoops, sorry, I went backwards there. So I want to say a little more about this, what I call the promise and deliver model of change. It is traditional in our system that it's the legislature that legislates electoral reform. This is actually true pretty much everywhere in the world, except in some cases the courts play a more significant role. In some cases you need to have both the House and the Senate. So there are different formulas, but that is the tradition, and it's a good one with all the problems that it has. This approach requires that political allies legislate change when the opportunity arises. Now you'll say, well, when does that ever happen? Well, in fact, it happened a lot in Europe at the end of the 19th century and mainly in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. That is when the bulk of European countries transitioned from first past the post to proportional representation. So it can happen. The conditions were rather special. I can't get into that here. But the world has changed since then. And what happened at that time is that we in Canada, the UK and the US, we all missed that window because the alignment of political forces was different, and then political interests were a little bit different. Elsewhere, what tended to happen is that you had a socialist party emerging or a social democratic party, and then the 2 mainstream parties were split, and one of them could see some advantages to proportional system, the other one might not. So you'd end up with an alliance of the Social Democrat, Socialist Party, and one of the mainstream parties, and you got your change that way. That did happen in Canada in a different way in Alberta and Manitoba. And that was a compromise solution. They brought in proportional representation in the form of STV in the big cities, Winnipeg, Calgary, and Edmonton. But then they brought in ranked ballots in the rural areas, which is where most of the seats were. So you ended up with a system that was predominantly still majoritarian, leading to about 3 decades later in the 1950s, the abandonment of the system simply because the political interests were aligned against proportional representation, and they just decided to do away with it in the cities as well. So that's how that model has what it is and how it's worked. So this is our history in Canada, very different from the European one in that we failed throughout. And so I say in Canada, it's the promise and betray model rather than promise and deliver. And the betrayals start with Mackenzie King in 1919 and 1921. Mackenzie King had promised to bring in STV, which is a proportional system, and lost his caucus. And after losing his caucus, had to abandon that promise. The most recent that we have federally, of course, is Justin Trudeau's abandonment in 2017. We're not so sure in that case whether it was the leader who made the decision pretty much by himself or whether he also had a rebellious caucus. But in Quebec, we've had several cases, and in every case in Quebec, the main problem has been the loss of caucus. Now, you have to imagine what's happening here is you have a party, it can be the Parti Québécois in the 1970s, the Liberals in the 2000s, or the CAQ in 2018. They win a false majority. And so you've got over half, usually around 55, 60% of the MPPs, MNAs they're called in Quebec, know very well that if you switch over to a proportional system, a good chunk of those people are going to lose their seats. I had calculated with the CAQ in Quebec, that was about 27% of the CAQ MNAs would lose their seats if you brought in a proportional system. Now, if you assume that those 27% have friends in the legislature as well who are fellow CAQists, you can see how the impetus towards resisting reform would get very strong. And that's what happened in Quebec every single time. With the Conservatives, they promised it in 1922, put it in their platform, but then they stopped talking about it. So that was a slightly different case. But with the Parti Québécois, with the Liberals and the CAQ, all of them, they lost their caucus. René Lévesque still wanted to bring in proportional representation when they abandoned it. Jean Charest probably still wanted to bring in proportional representation when he had the opportunity. But in both cases, and same thing with the CAQ, they lost their caucus. So that's really important. We need to understand that it's not just about party interests that are blocking change, it's also the fact that the leaders lose their caucus and it becomes very difficult to proceed. And I think that was a problem with the Liberals in Ontario as well. So it's a story of broken promises. That really is the Canadian story. Now, the basic pattern here is really quite obvious. Party will promise PR when first past the post is working against it, and then they will backtrack once they get elected, and they can see that it's actually working in their favor now. They want to renew that majority that they've got, and they're not going to do so if they get proportional representation. But as I just pointed out, problem's not even just with parties, but also with caucus itself. So what you have really here is a fundamental dysfunction of our political system when it comes to reforming how we vote, because you've got a fundamental conflict of interest here that makes it impossible to get the change that we need. So how do we deal with that? I will say also, there are variations on this theme. It's not just promise and betray. It's also don't promise in the first place. I would say the Conservatives follow that approach to a T. And I would say the NDP, when they have won power in Ontario, in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Nova Scotia, they've never brought in proportional representation either. In most cases, they hadn't really promised it in categorical terms. In the case of BC, they promised a referendum. They delivered on their referendum, but they didn't deliver on a referendum that was actually winnable the way that it was actually practiced. So this is either no promise at all, or it's promise and deflect. And what I call promise and deflect is you do all the right things, or maybe appear to do the right things, as they did in BC when they called the Citizens Assembly, or Ontario where they called the Citizens Assembly. But then you bring in a referendum saying, well, it's not really up to us politicians to decide, let's put it to the people. And then you don't offer the kind of leadership that you need. You set up a no side and a yes side. And of course, the no side has a huge advantage. And basically, it's just another way to break a promise. But it puts us as reformers in a very difficult position, because a referendum just sounds like the right thing to do. So if we want to be able to do things differently, we really have to have an alternative formula to a referendum as a way to give voice to citizens. It's already a big step that the governments are acknowledging that they need to hand it over to citizens, but a referendum is simply not the way to do that. The referendum is simply a way to kill reform. So how do we overcome then this conflict of interest problem? This is our fundamental dysfunction. How do we solve it? Well, one approach that's been used quite a lot is to hold citizens' assemblies or independent commissions. And there's been a slew of those. I've given the link here. I think Kathy by now has probably given the link to this PowerPoint in the chat. Pick it up there, and once you get into the PowerPoint, you can click into some of these links, like this document here, which has been produced by Fair Vote Canada, which looks at all of the commissions and assemblies and reports that there have been over the years. And every time that there's been an independent commission, assembly, or report, that responsible agency has been recommending proportional representation every single time. Where it does not happen is when it's an interparliamentary thing, when it's the government itself that's deciding how to move forward, like the CAC did, for example. They developed in-house the proposal that they wanted to put forward. They added a referendum to it, which would have killed it anyway, and then they ended up abandoning it altogether. And so what if you have all these independent forums if the recommendations aren't implemented? So you need to figure out a formula where you change the frame so that whatever is recommended is going to be implemented. And ultimately, what that means is that it's the conflict of interest itself that needs to be treated as unacceptable. In other words, we have to question the legitimacy of how decisions are made. We need to rise beyond partisan considerations across party lines. We need to set the norm that when it comes to voting systems, this is something that belongs to citizens themselves. We need to make it an easy ask. The ask should be to politicians, you need to recuse yourselves because you're in a conflict of interest. Maybe you don't need to say it quite so crudely. That's what it is. And what they need to do to recuse themselves is to establish a citizens-based approach in which politicians acknowledge that they are in a conflict of interest and commit themselves to acting on the recommendations of this independent body. So basically what I'm suggesting is we need to focus on process rather than the PR result we want. That's a much harder promise to break. It's if somebody says, I promise a citizens assembly and I promise to follow up because really this is something that belongs to citizens. How do you renege on a promise like that? I think that's much harder than reneging on a promise to make 2015 the last election. You can always argue that, well, we changed our minds or whatever, you know, but if you were to renege on a promise like this, I think sorry, I'm losing my words here, but it would be harder to live down than otherwise. I'll move on. So I want to point out that this is already happening. This idea of questioning the legitimacy of elected governments making decisions on electoral reform based on partisan interests. That legitimacy of broken promises is now being persistently challenged. Trudeau has been harassed on this by the media ever since. If ever the media wants to identify a broken promise, they always mention electoral reform. And that was 2017. It still goes on today. People in Fair Vote Canada who've studied the numbers riding by riding consider that he lost his majority in 2019 because of that broken promise. A lot of people who had voted strategically for the Liberals based on that promise, of course, went back to the NDP, they went back to the Greens, and that was just enough to deprive Trudeau of a second majority. In Quebec, a very interesting initiative, the MDN, which is the equivalent of Fair Vote Canada in Quebec, has actually called in the ethics commissioner on the broken promise and made a very strong case that this is ethically unacceptable. And I think that's very interesting. And also there's a charter challenge going on, which of course has to be held against the Charter of Rights and Human Rights and Freedoms. But they do mention also as an argument that there's a huge conflict of interest involved. And that's why it's so hard to get electoral reform any other way than through, in this case, a constitutional challenge. And the citizens' idea itself is spreading quite widely. Last June, I think everybody in this call probably already knows this, there was a motion to study the Citizens' Assembly option passed by the Procedures and House Affairs Parliamentary Committee. The Liberals voted for that. And I think that's really interesting. That's a little bit like what I was saying. That's a much easier ask to have a Citizens' Assembly than it is to actually promise proportional representation. Similarly, last fall, a motion was passed by the legislature in PEI to implement a Citizens' Assembly. We have to see whether the government there, which now has a majority, it's a Conservative government that has a majority. Some of them did vote for this motion, but most did not. Whether the Premier will actually pursue that promise. I wish Anna was here so she could comment on that. Nonetheless, the fact that a motion went through the legislature is very interesting. And finally, I'm going to want to talk about this. In Ontario, there's a huge push going on right now in 2022 for the 2022 election with all three of the opposition parties, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens, to all basically sign on to a common agreement going into the next election. I want to point out that the Ontario election is a very, very interesting case. In a sense, Ontario is where the Liberals in Ontario are, in a sense, where Trudeau was in early 2015 when he originally made his promise. The Liberals are in third place. They actually lost official party status in the last parliament. Right now, they're running about even with the NDP in the polls, but we could very well be facing another Conservative majority in Ontario because of vote splitting between the NDP, the Greens, and the Liberals. So the Liberals have awakened again. They had awakened to this idea before, but they have awakened again to the idea of electoral reform in Ontario. And Stephen Del Duca, who's the leader of the Liberal Party, at his leadership address at the last AGM of the Liberals, actually put electoral reform on the agenda for the campaigns. This is really huge to have the Liberals putting electoral reform on the agenda. We can expect that the Greens will have it on in their campaign platform as well. We also expect that the NDP will have it on their platform, although they have still not formally put it on the agenda. So the fact that the Liberals have done so is kind of throwing down the gauntlet to the NDP to do as well. Now, Del Duca has, you probably all know this, has put forward ranked ballots as his preferred solution. He's also said that if he's elected, he will bring in ranked ballots. But there's a contradiction. He can't actually do that without the NDP and the Greens. So his promise is actually contradictory. And so people have been pushing really, really hard for Del Duca to pivot and to put a citizens' assembly first. And then if the citizens' assembly proposes ranked ballots as a first step, as he would like, fine. But let's have the citizens' assembly. Citizens' assembly says that's what they want. Then we have to all acquiesce to that. Needless to say, neither the NDP or Fair Vote Canada or the Green Party think that that's going to happen. Nobody thinks that's going to happen. But nonetheless, if it is going to happen, that's the way it would have to happen. And so the idea here is that three parties may not all agree on the specifics. You know, you can have the NDP going in saying they want mixed member proportional. You can have the Liberals going in saying, well, we'd like to have ranked ballots at least as a first step. And the Greens saying, well, we just want proportional representation. We don't care what it is. But they can agree on process. And so I think that's what we need to push for. And we need to push really hard to get all three parties to agree on process. Whether they do so individually, which is what Fair Vote Canada is pushing for, or whether they do so collectively and sign an agreement amongst the three of them that if they are elected in some sort of minority situation to form government, they will bring in a citizens' assembly. And that's what I've been working on with another group of people or a bunch of other people independently of Fair Vote Canada. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So the centerpiece, anyway, of this new approach is a citizens' assembly. And just so that I wouldn't have a deck that was nothing but words, I decided to put this picture, which I got from Fair Vote Canada. But I want to close on this, mostly close on this slide here. And what I've done in this slide is I've included under this link a sample text. If there was to be an agreement involving the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens, what they would all sign and what would be in it, ideally. So this is kind of like to give you an idea of what an enriched citizens' assembly menu looks like. It would involve multi-party agreement on the following. First of all, the problem. That we have, everybody agrees first past the post is problematic, at least among those three opposition parties. Secondly, acknowledgement, explicit acknowledgement that there's a conflict of interest issue. We have to start getting this out of the political parties and out of politicians. Agreement on democratic principles of effective representation and good governance that would inspire a citizens' assembly. And a commitment to hand responsibility over to such an assembly. And here we need a timeline. Within 6 months after the election, a commitment to act on those recommendations, an open-ended mandate covering a full range of options. So that would include first past the post. That'll help bring the Conservatives on board. It will include ranked ballots. That will help bring the Liberals on board. And it will include different models of proportional representation. And then maybe a couple of other things that I think would be extremely valuable. One is, let's open it up so that the Citizens' Assembly could recommend an incremental approach to change, making it all the harder for whatever government is in place to resist. So instead of bringing it all in all at once and facing a rebellion from caucus, maybe do things a little bit at a time. However, if you do it a little bit at a time, let's have a formula in place so that we can ensure that there's an ongoing citizens process so that it really is a first step. So even if the first step was ranked ballots, if you had an ongoing citizens process, you test your first step and then propose something else as the second step and the third step. So as long as you have that ongoing process, I think the incremental approach would not be nearly so dangerous. What Fair Vote Canada is always worried about is that if you use an incremental approach, you could end up with just the first step and you stop there. So that would be serious concern. David, how am I doing for time? I'm afraid I forgot to check how I was doing. Okay, I'll take maybe at most another 3 or 4 minutes. I want to say a little bit about why I think this might work. I think that's significant. So first of all, the question of a conflict of interest is really obvious. So that's undeniable. You talk to ordinary citizens in the street, they get this right away. It doesn't take any explanation. The notion of recusing oneself is one that's very well established. Politicians are expected to recuse themselves if they have a financial interest in something. Well, guess what? When it comes to electoral reform, a lot of them do have a financial interest. It's their pensions. Thirdly, it's much harder to break a promise to entrust citizens with the process rather than having to bring in a big change. You know, a big change, you can say, well, if the timing's not right, we've got COVID or whatever. But if you're just talking about a citizens assembly process, that's really hard to turn your back on, a very hard promise to break, I think. Fourthly, the details can be adjusted. I talked about the possibility of an incremental approach. It's possible that you might add on an independent expert commission in addition to the Citizens Assembly. It doesn't have to be just a Citizens Assembly. So with that flexibility, I think it's possible to set up a process that politicians would be comfortable with. And the critical thing is really the framing that's involved, acknowledging that the partisan and the electoral conflicts of interest have to be circumvented. You have to find a way around that. Once you've acknowledged that, then you can find the solution. There's a role for the Greens. The Greens, partly because I think they work better with other parties. So any multi-partisan approach, I think, is one that Greens would tend to be relatively comfortable with. The Greens have been pushing the Citizens Assembly idea longer than anybody else, even longer than Fair Vote Canada, as a matter of fact. And the Greens are the most committed party in Parliament on electoral reform. In Ontario, I'd really like it if the Greens were to approach the NDP and the Liberals with the document that we had above and invite them to join them. Even if there are only two parties in that agreement, that would already be a big start. And if we got two parties, we'd probably be able to get the third party, which would not want to get left behind. So I think there's a role for the Green Party to play there. Not something I can insist upon too much because it's not really my call, but I want to put it out there. I'd really enjoy that if that would happen. And that's it. I'm going to stop there and we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks very much, Gail. That was great. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to start my video. And I'm also going to suggest, Gail, if you are able to multitask, that you put the link to your PowerPoint in the chat if you're able to do that, because we've had lots of requests. Oh, could we get the PowerPoint? And you had some embedded links in your PowerPoint that would be great for people to access. You can do that later on. But,
I was hoping Kathy would do that and had already done it.
Nope, that hasn't happened, and I don't think we're able to find your. I looked for it too and couldn't find the link. But if you were able to type it in at some point during this presentation, that'd be great. And then for our viewers, we have 43 participants listed, which is great. They're making a major sacrifice, which is not to participate in the procedural part of this VGM. So it's wonderful they're over with us. And you can ask your questions in two ways. One is to go to the Rocket chat, and we've inserted in the chat, the chat for this Zoom call, where you can go to ask questions in Rocket chat. Kathy will be handling those questions. And to my surprise, it looks like people can also enter questions into the Zoom chat. So I will monitor the Zoom chat. And between Kathy and me, we will cover the questions, put them to Real, and see if we can stump him, which I doubt. That's it. Let's go. Kathy, if you're there, do you have a question teed up for Real? And by the way, everybody, I do see the link in the chat from Real to his presentation. Thank you, Real. That's great. Any questions, Kathy, that you
hello,
have?
David, are you there?
Yeah, we hear you.
So good. All right, I was going to start with a thread that Constantine got started here in the Rocket chat. And he says that under Chapter 10 of the Charter, citizens have equal benefit under the law, but the first past the post system defeats that. Sorry, I've got too many windows up. By not respecting the will of the majority, the link to the Green, do we have the link to the Green Party case for PR? May agreed we should revive this. I went to see a lawyer, Peter Rosenthal, who successfully overturned unfair election law in a number of occasions. Mm-hmm. He said the case has merit. So Constantine's question, could there be an avenue to get funding under the court challenges program? And he leaves a link there. would make great earned media in the next election while guaranteeing more Green MPs if successful. Riel, you got that?
I got that one. The answer is fairly easy. I actually referred to it in my presentation. There is already a charter challenge underway, and it's actually quite advanced with affidavits having been received. And I think they're maybe still waiting for the federal government to respond to the original round of affidavits, but that's underway. You can look it up online. Look it up, Charter Challenge Electoral Reform. It's being led by Fair Voting BC and Springtide. One of the interesting things about that, I want to mention this to everybody. I personally have contributed considerably to this, and I would encourage you to do as well financially. These kinds of legal proceedings are very expensive, and they could use more money. So if you look it up, Charter Challenge Springtide, they accept contributions, and get this, you get a receipt. You get a tax receipt. That's real. I think that's significant because, you know, this allows you to contribute to our cause of electoral reform and get a receipt. You can't get that when you contribute to Fair Vote Canada. I'm not saying don't contribute to Fair Vote Canada, but this one here, you can contribute more.
Thanks, Al. That's great. And since we've mentioned Fair Vote Canada so often, I just want to point out to everybody that one of the participants on this call is Anita Nickerson. So Anita, welcome. Anita is Executive Director of Fair Vote Canada, and she is recruiting members. So go to the Fair Vote Canada website and join Fair Vote Canada. It is Canada's #1 proportional representation organization, second only to the Green Party. That was a little joke there, Anita. Sorry, I couldn't resist. All right, Kathy, do you have another question for us?
Sure. Do you want to tag team between the Pathway Rocket Chat and the Q&A, or do you want me just to go through some and then give some to you?
Yeah, let's tag team, and you go next.
Okay, your turn.
I'll go after. Does that work?
Okay, sure. This is a question from Vivian. Could the promise and deliver formula work better under a minority government? What if the winning party acted as if PR was already established by including MPs from other parties in the cabinet? What do you think, Riel?
I couldn't follow the total logic of it. Certainly, what we're looking at in terms of opportunities is a minority situation. You're definitely not going to get PR with a false majority government. It's almost unheard of. Well, it is unheard of in Canada. It has never worked. Yes, there's more of a chance when you have a minority government, but even when you do, as we do right now federally, for example, you don't necessarily, that's not necessarily your first priority. And in any case, you might not have the clout to get it through. So we have had minority situations. We have one now federally. We had one for a while in PEI, but it still hasn't. And we had the one in BC. In BC, the BC Greens were not able to get it. They didn't recommend a citizens' assembly, which might have flown. They got a referendum, and I think nobody imagined that in a referendum where the party that was putting it forward actually supported the yes side, everybody imagined that we would win, but we didn't.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I'm missing something in Vivian's question there. Maybe you could help me with that.
If Vivian wants to follow up, maybe you can put in a follow-up in the Rocket Chat, Vivian. Thanks very much. The next question comes from the chat menu on the chat on Zoom, and it's from Lynn Oliphant, and it goes like this. In the recent agreement by the NDP to support the Liberal government, was PR even on the table as a consideration?
Well, it's not, is it? My understanding is that the NDP wanted electoral reform on the table, and the Liberals said no. That gets me back to my idea about what's an easy ask and what's a difficult ask. And I don't know what the NDP asked for. If they had asked for a citizens' assembly, maybe they would have got that. They may still get that. There is a whole process of ongoing consultations between the two parties, and the Liberals themselves voted for the proc motion to study a citizens' assembly in the last parliament. I don't see why such a motion wouldn't pass again. The Liberals had voted for it, as did the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. So that will be the next step federally, will be to study a citizens' assembly. Then we'll have to see what happens in Prague. If the Liberals are whipped to not recommend a citizens' assembly, so they could study it and still recommend against it, then we'll know that they're getting instructions from the PMO to kill the whole idea of a citizens' assembly. But to me, that's very, very difficult to do, to say, no, we will not, we don't want to hear from citizens on this issue. See, you see it, the ask for a citizens' assembly is just so much easier and so much harder to avoid. So that's my hope of how we might proceed. Now, if we do get a citizens' assembly, that doesn't mean we're going to get it in time for the next election, but at least that would be that much water under the bridge in terms of getting the message out and getting some consensus.
And just to add to your answer, Réal, and on Lynn's question, PR doesn't look like it was on the table in the confidence in the supply agreement that was just released on Monday, but electoral reform was. And if you go to the very last point 7 in the agreement, you can Google the agreement, it's online from the Prime Minister's office. You'll see that they talk about a variety of electoral reform issues, but not proportional representation, which is very, very disappointing. And our experience here in DC was that the NDP really put forward a very complicated question on the referendum, and they didn't campaign on it. So I'm quite cynical about the depth of the commitment of the NDP to proportional representation, although in fairness to the NDP, they've always campaigned on it when they saw the success Greens were getting out of it. Just kidding. Okay, next question is from you, Kathy. Have you got another question on the rocket chat?
Yes, this one's from Erwin. They asked, why should we not expect the winning party to renege on the commitment to act on the CA, the Citizen Assembly's recommendation? Let me do that again, Réal, because there's some knots in there.
Yeah.
Why should we, come on, it's a test. Why should we not expect the winning party to renege on the commitment to act on the Citizens Assembly's recommendation?
Okay, so what he's saying is, why do I think that a citizens' assembly is an easier ask and it's harder to break that promise?
Exactly.
Simply because I think that to refuse to hear from citizens is almost embarrassing. I mean, you can't claim to have any democratic credentials and at the same time saying, well, we promised we'd hear from citizens, but we're not going to do it. I mean, you'd be better off as a party to not promise it in the first place. And maybe that's why we're having a little bit of trouble in the Ontario campaign, getting the Liberals and the NDP to actually make that promise explicitly. I think we're close, but we're not there yet. And anything that we could do to put a little bit more pressure to get that promise made explicitly before the election would help us move along for sure. But people are careful now. They're becoming more careful about what they promised because they get burned, right?
That's great. Thank you, Réal. And just for participants, you can look in the chat to find a note from Tom Cullen with the link to the Charter Challenge website, charterchallenge.ca. And so if you're interested in supporting that financially, go to that website. Thank you, Tom, for inserting the link there. Kathy, I don't have more questions here on the Zoom chat. So do you have another question on Rocket Chat? And if you don't, then I'm going to ask one that I've been waiting to ask Réal about referendum.
Okay, I probably have a couple here.
Okay, good.
Let's see, Vivian. Given that the first past the post creates polarization, which we are increasingly seeing in Canada, and PR is one of the most important solutions, I'm assuming, to polarization, might an even easier ask be a citizen's assembly on how to solve political polarization?
Rather than electoral reform.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that would be an easier ask. And maybe it would get us proportional representation. It's not something that ever occurred to me. When we talk about setting up the mandate for a citizens' assembly on electoral reform, one of the things that would be important to do is to identify those democratic principles of fair representation and good governance that you're concerned about. And so I would expect that, to the extent, I don't know how much detail people would go into, but everybody knows that one of the reasons we need electoral reform is to reduce the hyper partisanship and polarization that we currently face. So that can certainly be included in any kind of preamble to a discussion of the Citizens Assembly. Whether it's wise and easier to try an indirect route such as Vivian is suggesting, I don't know. It's not something I've ever thought about, to be honest.
I see a couple of questions here in the chat. One is from Cheryl, Matthew. Yes, please feel free to type questions into the chat, Cheryl. And I see a question from Susan Short on what channel are we on Rocket Chat. I'll paste that in right now, Susan, so you can see it, all the instructions there on how to ask questions through Rocket Chat. This will be useful for other GreenTalk panels later on in this VGM. So it is worth going in to Rocket Chat so you can ask your questions there as well. But people should feel free just to use the Zoom chat as well. Kathy, on to you. Do you have another question?
I have a question and an answer, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, well, here we go. Hold on. Give me a minute. Constantine asked, is the Green Party of Canada ever going to publicly ask the NDP why they did not require PR to support the Liberals? And then I received an answer that sort of answers that I'm going to read out from someone who is in the know. And if you want to know who that is, you can just go to the Rocket Chat. But NDP did ask for PR or a Citizens Assembly in CASA. I believe CASA must be the supply agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Liberals said no, because Trudeau is stuck on an alternate vote, winner take all ranked ballots, or nothing. A change of Liberal leadership might help. And here's the pitch. If you're in Ontario, help us here. Del Duca is pushing the same thing, and we are in the last few weeks before platforms come out to change their mind. We are doing visits on Ontario Liberal candidates now. So visit your Ontario Liberal candidate and talk about electoral reform would help. Just a pitch.
Over to you, Hayal. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. And Fair Vote Canada currently has a campaign to meet with as many Ontario Liberal candidates as possible. So we will definitely, and I'm still very active with Fair Vote Canada. I'm the president of the National Capital Region chapter, actually. So we will be working on that front for sure. We've also been working very, very hard at reaching Del Duca's campaign team with this idea of pivoting and putting the Citizens Assembly first. I think we're very, very close, and there's a good chance that the Liberals will be prepared to sign a multi-party agreement calling for a Citizens Assembly. So I can't say more than that, but I think there's a very good chance, and this is a fight worth fighting for sure.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. I don't see any questions being typed into the Zoom chat. So, Kathy, do you have questions, or can I ask my question about referendum?
It's all yours, David.
Okay, great.
Can I ask, David, before you go,
Yeah.
You still have enough time. I did see a question go by myself.
Okay, good. Which one was that?
I would like to answer it. I don't remember who it was that was asking. Somebody was asking how much a Citizens Assembly costs. Well, obviously, a Citizens Assembly in Yukon or Prince Edward Island is going to cost a lot less than it would federally. So there's no single answer to that. But when Fair Vote Canada was looking at this fairly closely, we think that a federal Citizens Assembly would cost somewhere in the range of $5 million or something like that. So let's say as a generous envelope from $5 to $10 million. It depends how many people you want to involve at each regional level, because you'd want to have an assembly of maybe 200 people, let's say, across the country, but you'd also want to have sub-nodes provincially or in different regions, so you'd have one for BC, you'd have one for Alberta, you'd have one for the two other prairie provinces, and one for Ontario, and so on. So you'd want to involve people in that kind of wider consultation somehow. So you'd need a kind of a federated model of some sort if you could figure it out. In Ontario, of course, it's still a big province, so we'd probably be looking at several $1 million. But what is that? I mean, that's less than $1 per citizen. You know, I think we can live with that in order to improve our democracy. So that's my answer to that question. But no, we don't actually have a good estimate other than what we see other citizens' assemblies have cost in the past. Of course, we use that as a guide. Yes,
Thank you,
5 million is a
that
pittance.
up. That's great. That's great. Actually, my question related to that because referendums are also often framed by activists fighting for proportional representation as a way of killing the idea. And the NDP did that here in BC by asking a really complicated question, which made it almost impossible to win that referendum. But there's also experience in Ontario with Citizens Assembly around proportional representation, which was also a very bad experience for the people who participated in it. And could you comment on how you avoid manipulating the process in a Citizens Assembly so that it leads to sort of surprising outcomes, let's put it that way?
Yes, I think there is a danger that a citizens' assembly process could be manipulated as well, particularly in a majority government situation. Few people know that under Harper, there was a sort of citizens' assembly-like process on electoral reform, but surprise, surprise, it recommended that we just stick with the existing system. It was assigned to a right-wing think tank to organize from Alberta. So it can be manipulated as well. One of the things that I think is really important is it needs to be a multi-party process in terms of setting up the mandate, right? It's not something that you do out of the PMO, even in a majority situation. It's got to be done at the committee level, and you have to have agreement from more than one party before you can go ahead with a mandate. Now, in the case of Ontario, we would envisage, therefore, we're only envisaging that this is going to work under a minority situation in Ontario. So all three of the opposition parties would have to be involved, and hopefully one could get the acquiescence of the Conservatives as well by putting first past the post on the ticket. You know, they're invited to consider the existing system and to recommend that if that's what they want, because we want to hear from citizens. So again, going back to that easy ask, that or a difficulty in refusing, that is a difficult ask to refuse if you got your model on the table. So I think that's really important. And then being as precise as possible about what should go into the Citizens Assembly as part of the agreement itself, right? So it needs to be adequately funded. It needs to have a public education component. It needs to be based on an independent process organized by an independent organization that is acceptable to all of the parties. So once you've got all those ingredients, I think it makes it a lot harder to manipulate.
Yeah.
I would say if you've got the Conservatives still insisting on a referendum, the pushback is, well, let's see what the Citizens Assembly recommends on the referendum idea. So that's kind of it gives you a backup on that issue, and hope that once they've heard all of the experts on what's wrong with referendums, that they will agree that it's not a good idea. And if you propose something else, if you say, look, instead, we've had some serious public consultations, the consensus is quite strong, let's just go ahead with this, but let's have a review process. You don't have to call it a referendum, but you could say the review process maybe could involve a referendum. So that gives you that kind of extra margin of negotiation that I think could be useful.
Makes a ton of sense. That's how New Zealand did it, right? They had a review process referendum after they'd run two general elections under a pro-rep system, right? So that makes a ton of sense. And I think that's hopefully going to end up being Green Party policy in the next federal campaign.
Yeah, you were talking about the New Zealand case there, David?
Yes.
Yeah, that had a follow-up. Now, you have to keep in mind that was a follow-up because there was a party that wanted to get rid of proportional representation. So that's why you have to try to sync this whole idea of partisan-based decision-making when it comes to any of these things. If you could try to eliminate the partisan perspective on things, and all the analysis has to be done in terms of what's right for citizens. That's the ethic, that's the normative framework that we've got to hang on to and sell.
So we have 5 minutes left, and if anybody has an urgent question, raise your hand. We haven't tried this yet, but we didn't know that people could raise their hands in these seminars. So try it if you have an urgent question. We will keep monitoring the chat, and we will monitor Rocket Chat as well. There's Zoom chat and Rocket Chat. If you have an urgent question, raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll go to you straight away. But there's only 5 minutes left before Paul Manley joins us, and we start the conversation about Ukraine. Are there any hands up? I'm just going to check to see.
Yes, Cheryl Matthews, I'm going to allow you to talk. Thank you for test driving this. You are the first one to try it in the whole VGM. Here we go.
Thank you. Over to you, Cheryl.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I had to find that. I had to hit the unmute button first. So great. Well, happy to, be the guinea pig here. I just wanted to, sorry, I joined a bit late. I was traveling this morning, but I'm just wondering what the possibility for some type of agreement between us, the NDP, I don't know about the Conservatives. They probably wouldn't ever go for proportional representation, but I don't know. I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at their platform I have, but I haven't. Anyway, so I'm just wondering about what possibility that could be for us. I don't know if it was talked about earlier, but I think that would be maybe an idea in advance of the next election. So if there's anyone who wants to comment on that. Thank
Réal.
you.
Oh, thank you. Great question, Cheryl. And Réal has a lot of experience in this. Over to you, Réal.
I've certainly spoken with a lot of conservatives. I think going into the next election, if Jean Charest was the conservative leader, that would increase our chances quite considerably, because he had led the liberal process in Quebec to go for proportional representation. But I just think with the conservatives, you don't even ask for them to support proportional representation. You ask them to support a citizens' assembly, hand it over to citizens. That's very consistent with conservative values, I think. They're very distrustful of government. They should be distrustful of themselves in that regard. And I think that would sell. When they had the vote in Prague, the conservatives voted against it. And I was rather surprised they didn't have a very good reason to vote against it. I would hope now that they might also vote for it. It'd be great if one could get a unanimous agreement to study a citizens' assembly, and then a unanimous agreement to go with it as well. And then in Ontario, same thing. I wouldn't, going into the election, invite the Conservatives personally, simply because I don't have the energy for it, and I don't trust them to come forward. But I think after the election, you try to get them on board for a citizens' assembly. So I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, Cheryl, but to me, that's the way to go.
I totally agree with what Cheryl is saying, is that cross-party support is key. And, I think that Conservatives won a plurality of the vote in the last 2 general elections. So some of the Conservatives are going to start to say, well, actually, proportional representation may make sense. These false majorities, which are leading to liberal governments, aren't serving the Conservatives well anymore either. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
We have 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes,
Sorry.
I want to say this. This is important.
Yeah.
The things with the Conservatives is the proportional representation would split the party, and nobody's going to want to get into that. Whereas if you say, let's leave it to a citizens' assembly, there's disagreement on this issue, let's leave it to citizens themselves, you're much more likely to get some traction.
Great point. Excellent point.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Laurie Curran, and I'm a fellow Green, and I am an advocate for safe technology. I would like to respectfully acknowledge all our various present locations. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We would be wise to learn from the cultures that know that all life on Earth is interconnected, and our individual and collective choices have consequences for the whole. Greens and others whose priorities lie with protecting our people and our planet are facing great challenges. Presently, large corporate interests whose priorities are to maximize their financial profits are controlling governments worldwide. We as Greens can lead the way to unite the people to demand our governments choose policies that keep the big picture in mind, prioritizing the well-being of the people and the planet over corporate profits. Using our 6 green principles to guide us and following the precautionary principle would help us make wise choices for our planet our children, and future generations. Tonight, our panelists for Green and Safe Technology, Why and How, share their expertise and demonstrate why our choices in telecommunications implementation matter, and how we can make the wise choices that encompass all our 6 principles. For example, for ecological wisdom, by protecting our planet and ecosystems from further disruptions from non-natural electromagnetic radiation. Non-violence, by protecting the people and all life in the environment from harm to their biological processes. Social justice, by acknowledging that some people are more sensitive to non-natural electromagnetic radiation and should have full opportunities for personal and social development, including a healthy environment in which to live. Sustainability, by protecting biodiversity, by supporting the natural environment that supports all life and stopping man-made harms to it. Respect for diversity, by honoring and valuing the Earth's biological and ecological diversity and protecting it and individuals that are the most sensitive to NNEMR from these man-made harms. And participatory democracy, by supporting the citizens who expect and deserve a transparent public consultation process to choose telecommunications infrastructure. Our panelists tonight are Marg Friesen from the Environmental Health Association of Manitoba, Shelley Wright, representing Canadian Educators for Safe Technology, April O'Donoghue, representing Citizens Against the Proliferation of Cell Antennas in the Eastern Townships in Quebec, and Frank Clegg, the CEO of Canadians for Safe Technology. Okay, so the top reasons to change the current direction of the rollout of wireless technologies. Number 1, impacts on the environment. Number 2, impacts to human health and well-being. Number 3, infringement of human rights. And they are also major contributors to climate change and pollution. Our panelists will focus on the first 4 of these concerns during their presentations tonight, but there are other serious concerns as well, including security breaches and risks to personal and private or business privacy, satellite impact, weather forecasting accuracy, and increased economic burden. Marg, is Marg ready to go?
I hope so. Thank you very much, Lori.
Thank you.
Now it just, all right. So I'll be talking about the environmental aspects, and the title of my talk is why the birds, bees, and trees need protection in law from wireless radiation and how we can make this happen. So today I'm representing the Environmental Health Association of Manitoba. We're not-for-profit, group founded in 2012. And our goal is to promote education about environmental sensitivities and environmentally related issues. My name is Margaret Friesen, or Marg. I have a Bachelor of Science degree, a Master's of Science degree, and 30 years experience working with the federal government and University of Manitoba in original research, cancer research, ecosystem toxicology, and DNA population genetics of Arctic marine mammals. So post-retirement in 2008, started intensively looking at the issue of electromagnetic radiation, also known as wireless radiation, and impacts on health. Now it's not flipping for me. Why is that? There we go. So the first part is why, and then how will come later. So why a protective law for plants and animals is needed. So there are many sources of EMR, electromagnetic radiation or wireless radiation. And in March year 2000, when CEPA, Canadian Environmental Protection Act, came into force, or came into force in 2000, yeah, 2000, there it is, came into force, there were very few cell towers. Today in Canada, there are approximately 50,000 cell towers and approximately 8,500 cell network antennas. So those include the antennas you see there. There are more than one, of course, on antennas, and there are also many on apartment blocks. So as new technologies are rolled out, tens of thousands more across Canada will be installed every 20 to 100 meters or so in urban areas. This is what they look like. So some of them anyway. 4G, 5G antennas are also being installed on lampposts and poles, paving the way for 5G antennas every half block in Winnipeg, where I live, at least 3,700 and perhaps more than 7,000, and that's according to the City of Winnipeg staff. This is what some of them look like, how close they are. This is in Mission, BC today, so they're up already. 5 homes and at least 3 cell installations. Also many smart meters. So there are millions across Canada and millions to come. BC alone is planning on 1.1 million gas utility meters in addition to the many they have now. And Quebec has the stated goal of 1 in every home, school, business, and other buildings. Also have to consider low orbit satellites. Already, there are more than 2,000 in orbit and tens of thousands or more are planned. So we now have, I'm just going to try to see what's written here. We now have today's ambient levels of wireless radiation, EMR, originating from human activity is estimated to be millions, actually trillions of times higher than natural levels. Adding more EMR emitting antennas will lead to substantially more in the environment. And this figure is from a report that I'll be talking about a little later. So Health Canada does have something called Safety Code 6 guidelines, which are for people, non-human organisms. But there are none for non-human organisms. So what is the science for that would support bringing this into the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA, for non-human organisms? But before I go into that, this is a frequently asked question, and that is, can non-ionizing EMR cause harm even if it does not have as strong energy as ionizing radiation? So we know that X-rays are harmful, but in the past, it was believed that, that there wasn't enough energy in non-ionizing radiation. So the answer is non-ionizing EMR can cause adverse biological effects at extremely low levels. And only one of the many scientists, those with strong physics backgrounds, is Dr. Paul Heroux from McGill University Faculty of Medicine, who has a PhD in electrical engineering and health sciences. Many physicists do not have the training in the health sciences. And he presented at what was called the EMF Medical Conference, which was a conference held for medical doctors and others for CME, continuing medical education credits. Right. So, and he's got his website here. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. So just to get an overview of the science here. This report was done some years ago, but it gives a general view of what is out there, right? Even today, in terms of proportion of studies. Oops. A portion of studies that show adverse effects. So this was a study done from India, where they reviewed the science and for humans and other animals and plants, wildlife, bees and birds. You can see that the greater proportion has found effects, and the report even say that they are harmful effects. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of the science supporting concern. And this one was one with EMR that looked at base stations or mobile telecommunications antennas, and are also here in North America called cell towers. So electromagnetic radiation of mobile telecommunication antennas affects the abundance and composition of wild pollinators, is their title. And they conclude that these changes that they saw associated with electromagnetic fields have important ecological and economic impacts on the pollination service that could significantly affect the maintenance of wild plant diversity and crop production. Now, this is a study or information that was compiled about insects, and there's a big concern about the worldwide decline of entomofauna or insects, and they concluded that there are over 40% of insect species are threatened with extinction. There's certain groups that are more susceptible than others, and also aquatic insects, not just terrestrial ones. So this is a graph where they show the drivers. So why is this? And they conclude that it could be habitat change, pollution, biological traits, climate change. And some recent reviews, I was the first author on one of them, we all concluded that EMR could be a cofactor. So these many bird species are affected. One example is the European robin. This was published in Nature, one of the studies. So ambient EMR affected behavior, and the weak broadband field very efficiently disrupted their magnetic compass. We also see effects in trees and other plants. This is a study that was done out of Germany, and you can see that on the one side with the lower EMF radiation, electromagnetic field radiation, was more affected than the other side where there was damage. And they've got a whole series of pictures depicting this, and these are at ambient low levels. So we got a little gift here in 2021, and that was this fabulous review done by Blake Levitt, a medical journalist, Henry Lai, and who's he's been in this research for decades, and John Mansville, who is a bird specialist and worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they did this very comprehensive review in 3 parts, many pages, and there are close to 1,000 references. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes. Where healthy breeding bird populations had persisted when cell towers were installed and are operating, nest and site abandonment, plumage deterioration, locomotion problems, reduced survivorship and death were noted in house sparrows, white storks, rock doves, magpies, colored doves, and other species. This was documentation in the field of some very troubling consequences of the impacts of cell tower radiation. Biological effects have been seen broadly across all taxa and frequencies at vanishingly low intensities comparable to today's ambient exposures. Broad wildlife effects have been seen on orientation and migration, food finding, reproduction, mating, nest and den building, territorial maintenance and defense, and longevity and survivorship. Cyto and genotoxic effects have also been observed. So clearly there are adverse effects. So how can wildlife, plants, animals, and other non-human organisms be protected? One way is by including EMR in a law. Given that EMR at ambient levels is biologically active and can harm diverse life forms, and there is no legislation, policy, or guideline in Canada protecting plants and animals from exposure to EMR, it is time for a law to provide that protection. The environmental, I didn't write it all in full, but it should be the Environmental Protection Act, Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA, is a logical law. So this act is currently being amended. It's in the Senate, and it will soon go to committee, and maybe has today, I don't know, to the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee. So to educate and inspire Canadians, we hope to take action, Prevent Cancer Now and Canadians for Safe Technology have created a white paper or a backgrounder, whatever you prefer to call it. And this is the title page. Protect Bees, Birds, and Trees, include electromagnetic radiation in Canadian Environmental Protection Act amendments. The key statement here is a long one, and one of the reasons for that is because we had a lawyer to have a look at it. So he has worded it as such: protect fauna and flora, so plants and animals and plants, as well as human health, including provisions and amendments to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999 to address current gaps in the regulatory regime, and by making some frequencies of anthropogenic, that's from human activity, non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, also known as wireless radiation, subject to explicit regulation. So that ends my part about the law, but I have a final thought, and that we also can influence the amount of radiation that is in the environment. And I'm going to quote Paul Heroux again, and he says, "Fortunately, there is a spectacular alternative to wireless, optical fiber. Prosperity is better served by a fiber in every home because future data needs, not only of industry, but for individuals, will soon outpace all that wireless has to offer." And so I'd like to thank you for your attention. And we're going to move to the next speaker, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions either later today or you can contact me directly. So my email address is ehamanitoba@gmail.com.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to screen share here. If you can exit, that would be great. Thank you. Presentation mode seems slow today. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. And twice provincially in BC to spotlight the climate change crisis. He gave legal counsel to David Suzuki and found a sincere connection based on mutual respect and a goal to leave a legacy of sustainable practices behind for future generations. I am the Director of Canadian Educators for Safe Technology. I was a guest speaker at 2 EMF electromagnetic fields medical symposiums at Women's College Hospital, Toronto. I passed wired safe tech resolutions for 7 years at Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, ETFO, annual meetings of 800 teacher representatives. Today, there are more cell towers, small cell network antennas, more devices than ever before, without fully understanding the impact these microwave emitting sources can have on our health. Artificial electromagnetic radiation is digitally pulsed and interferes with the exquisite natural communication within and between the cells of your body and can have an impact on the chemicals of your body. Biophysicists with extensive knowledge of EMFs and the impact they can have within our bodies are qualified to report on the biological impacts. Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt you. According to the World Health Organization, RFR is a group 2B possible human carcinogen in the same category as lead. Today, experts with scientific evidence urgently request that RF be reclassified as a group 1 known human carcinogen in the same category as tobacco smoking. Robust international gold standard scientific studies clearly indicate harm. More than 200 peer-reviewed studies published after 2015 revision of Safety Code 6 show RF radiation is harmful to human health at exposure levels far below Safety Code 6 maximum limits. As Mark said, there are 50,000 cell towers in Canada and more than 850,000 cell network antennas, tens of thousands more 4 and 5G small cell antennas are to be installed every 20 to 100 meters in your neighborhood. Increased exposures increases everyone's risk. Health Canada's Safety Code 6 guidelines are based on 6-minute thermal tests to ensure RFs don't heat human tissue. There are no science-based guidelines for wireless devices that reflect the way people of all ages use their devices, including 24/7 exposure. China, Russia, and parts of Italy and Switzerland have cell tower guidelines 50 times safer than Canada's. Health Canada does not regulate public exposures. The telecom industry is responsible, and most measures fall within the excessively high limits. As the industry pushes for a greater proliferation of cell towers and 5G antennas to meet sales quotas, or because one resident dropped the calls, these signals inside our bedroom windows from sources outside our windows can increase the cumulative injury for everyone, including young children who have a lifetime of exposure to consider. Medically sensitive or electromagnetically disabled people can become injured or displaced. Everyone should be concerned. There are more Canadians living with electrosensitivity than with peanut allergies. Approximately 1 million Canadians are severely or moderately electromagnetically sensitive. A larger number of people have biomarkers that indicate potential electrosensitivity in their lifetime. Reducing your exposure is essential. 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS, by the medical director at the Environmental Health Clinic at Women's College Hospital in Toronto. This is my medical accommodation letter. These accommodations create inclusion and equity for our EHS disabled ATFO members. I experienced what scientists call microwave sickness around wireless devices in the microwave range, which include Wi-Fi and Bluetooth emissions. Some children and teachers have been injured by wireless signals and have had to leave schools. These are their symptoms. Persons with immune deficiencies, heart arrhythmias, Lyme disease, MS are often sensitive to wireless signals because of a genetic or environmental predisposition. Firefighters or hydrofield workers can experience the cumulative effect of toxic chemical or electrical exposures in the workplace, and they can become more susceptible to cancers with additional cell tower exposures. People with concussions or older residents can be more sensitive to these neurotoxicants. Children's skulls are thinner and their cells are rapidly growing. Epidemiologist Dr. Deborah Davis expresses concerns about childhood cancers, spikes in autism, and the effects of microwave radiation on the thinking and memory development of the fetal brain. Safety Code 6 did not protect me. Health Canada's Safety Code 6 suggests over 1 million microwatts per meter squared is safe for everyone. Like someone with a peanut allergy, I can feel signals just under 10. Building biologists and the Bioinitiative report recommend safer guidelines at least 100,000 times less than Health Canada's guidelines for vulnerable populations. Health Canada's RF guidelines need to reflect on the way we use our devices and include vulnerable people, including children. Microwave radiation is cumulative. The amount of radiation people can tolerate during their lifetime is different for each person. These are the sources of my debilitating symptoms. Symptoms can linger from 8 hours to 3 days after wireless signals are absent. For some, symptoms are permanent. I was excited when Wi-Fi was installed at my school. In the beginning, I ignored my symptoms. On Mondays, I'd feel poisoned, then progressively ill through the week. I'd recover by Sunday evenings. I became too sick to teach full-time. Curled up in a fetal position for days, ignoring my symptoms made things worse. Wireless-induced MS symptoms became debilitating and mentally taxing. My inability to perform independent tasks in the evening negatively impacted my family. My 18-year-old son was concerned. He asked if I was dying. Every wireless text created a sharp zapping head pain, like I was being electrocuted, and subsequent head pressure would build. Additional texts led to debilitating migraines the next day. Cell towers, routers, and other wireless devices also triggered similar symptoms. Jumping through political hoops to seek accommodations was exhausting and time-consuming. We found safe, wired solutions. My husband is a mechanical engineer, my daughter an environmental engineer, and my son a web designer. Our high-tech family uses wired adapters to connect all our devices. And this is how we started. First, we looked for multiple sources of radiation at home. Next, we measured signals with a meter to identify sources of radiation. These are safe wired solutions we use. I text my children on Facebook Messenger from a wired computer. A $15 timer can turn off your router at bedtime. You can connect Ethernet devices using adapters such as USB or Lightning. You can buy devices that are compatible with Ethernet adapters at local computer stores. Cell calls can be forwarded to the home landline, and meetings are achieved using wired technology. You can also purchase and use a corded landline phone when you're at home. Cell network signals in our community are not required to operate our wired devices. 3 microwatts per meter squared is enough signal strength to operate cellular devices. An adapter RJ45 to Lightning or USB enables you to wire most devices so you can turn off wireless networks. 5G sources are installed too close to homes. Your proximity to the signal source and duration of exposure impact your exposure level. A young soccer player in my neighborhood is heart sensitive to wireless signals. Another child was 6 weeks from heart surgery when her parents discovered the wireless signals were the culprit. Her surgery was canceled. Now she avoids wireless exposures and her heart condition has disappeared. Children and adults like her cannot tolerate 5G antennas outside their bedroom windows. Green spaces such as beaches, parks, and trails need protection from wireless pollution. 5G installations often include 3G or 4G signals in addition to 5G, and these signals outside our homes would be devastating for some people. My house would no longer be a safe refuge. 5G would also negatively impact the public right-of-way. I wouldn't be able to walk along the street or access essential services. 5G antennas and cell towers can also negatively impact the value of homes. Disabled persons are disproportionately disadvantaged, and they may not be employed, and their home represents their life savings. For 2 decades, our integration needs have been ignored, and barriers to safe housing, employment, and transportation are much greater. Policymakers need to be informed so they can create accessible public places. Wired technology supports everyone. This disability sign is used in the workplace, hospitals, medical clinics, and public events. Fiber optics to the premises, FTTP, is a superior solution. It provides inclusive connections that effectively accommodate medically disabled persons, enabling access to essential services. FTTP will support desired indoor wireless systems and provide healthier options for those who want to protect their family with wired technology. Our community is planning fiber optics to the premises. Some residents have fought tirelessly to stop 5G antennas outside their bedroom windows. Community-owned fiber optics to the premises, FTTP for homes and businesses, is the safest, superior, inclusive option to connect residents in your community. If we all push for greener, safer tech that everyone in Canada can inclusively access, the industry will provide it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. That was a great presentation. And I think that
April, your microphone's not on.
What an amateur I am here. Hold on a second. All right, thanks for that. So thank you, Shelley. Hi, you just heard about two major concerns about the wireless radiation that all Canadians and our natural environment are increasingly exposed to. What I'd like to talk about is how undemocratic the system is. My name is April O'Donoghue. I own a conference management company specialized in medical conferences. Since 2012, I've been leading a growing citizens movement opposed to the excessive proliferation of cell tower antennas in the eastern townships of Quebec. I feel a very close kinship to all living beings, which is the reason I am committed to this cause. When I first learned that a telecommunications company wanted to put up a 300-foot cell tower near my home, my first thought was how it would destroy the beautiful landscape that I loved so much. So I started looking into whether we could have a say regarding the installation of the cell tower. And that's when I discovered that the aesthetics was the least of my worries. The greater problem was the serious risk to our health and to the wildlife and the trees around us. What convinced me was that the number of high-quality peer-reviewed studies and the credibility of the scientists speaking out. But my greatest concern was and is that we have no say. You can choose to use a mobile phone or not, like you can choose to smoke. But if a cell antenna is installed near your house, or Wi-Fi is set up in your classroom, or a smart meter is placed on your building, then you have no say in whether you'll be exposed 24/7 to this radiation. This is about allowing the radiation 24/7 of all living things, whether they accept it or not, whether they understand the consequences or not. In Canada, telecommunications are under federal jurisdiction. They're regulated by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, ISED. For health concerns, ISED defers to Health Canada's Safety Code 6. To install a cell tower, a company must lease or buy a piece of land, get permission from the land use authority or the municipality, and carry out a public consultation. No public consultation is required to modify an existing tower or to place antennas on a non-tower structure like a utility pole, a building, etc. The consultation process is run by the telecommunications company itself. The company must notify the very closest residents, and the wider community is only informed for the tallest towers. So while all Canadians can take part in the consultation, they are not informed of it. Health concerns cannot be raised. They are deemed not relevant. The results are not made public. Even when citizens are overwhelmingly against the cell tower, the project is generally approved by ISED. Municipalities feel helpless. Even when municipalities refuse to give permission, the minister of ISED can and generally does override the municipality's decision. The city of Châteauguay in Quebec went to court against Rogers, arguing that the health of people living near such an installation would be at risk. The case ended up in the Supreme Court, where the city lost. Mayor Joan Eby of East Bolton, Quebec said, "It made you feel like the municipalities sit at the kids' table and Bell and the federal government are at the adults' table." She was commenting on her feeling of powerlessness in trying to negotiate regarding a tower that was the object of citizen protests for over 2 years. The project went ahead. As long as proponents say that they will respect Health Canada's Safety Code 6, there is little that citizens can do about it. The problem is Safety Code 6 that's supposed to protect humans is obsolete. There are no laws to protect non-human species from RF radiation, none. Safety Code 6, Health Canada's safety limits for human exposure to radio frequency fields, does not protect Canadians. It's based on an obsolete assumption that tissue must be heated to be harmed. Health Canada has never completed a proper systematic review of the scientific evidence, and Health Canada relies on others when setting its guidelines. in particular ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. It's a private self-appointed group consisting mainly of engineers with ties to the telecommunications industry and the US military. ICNIRP has come under criticism for conflicts of interest. People across the country are worried with reason and have no recourse. Citizens groups are opposing towers and smart meters every day. Parents feel helpless trying to convince school boards to remove the Wi-Fi from classrooms. Electrosensitive people are struggling to find housing and jobs. And there's evidence that wildlife is suffering silently. Basic human rights are being infringed. The general public is generally not aware of the potential health risks. And making matters worse, Health Canada's website is misinforming Canadians. Most small cell antennas for the 5G network will not require public notification. They're being placed low to the ground without notice or public consultation. Citizens and their local governments cannot prevent the installation of these antennas because they are going generally on existing infrastructure, so no consultation. We need to apply the precautionary principle. When an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. All of our presentations have been about wireless radiation. 5G is just the latest iteration, but one that's bringing additional challenges. Additional and higher frequencies, new technologies, the need for a denser infrastructure of antennas. So I will end by drawing your attention to what people who are concerned about this issue are doing. The urgent appeal to the Government of Canada to suspend the 5G rollout and to choose safe and reliable fiber connections. This appeal is supported by 37 grassroots Canadian organizations. It's been signed so far by over 20,000 Canadians. There's a lot more detail in it, but here are the three main points it is focused on. We, the citizens and residents of Canada, urgently appeal to the Government of Canada to ensure all Canadians can have internet access that is safe, fast, reliable, resilient, secure, affordable, and in the long term, the most environmentally and economically sound for Canada. Protect Canadians' health and the environment before further rollout of wireless infrastructure, including 5G. Provide a meaningful, transparent process for municipalities and their citizens to have a decisive say over the installation of cellular network antennas. Citizens should have a say. They should have the right to participate in decisions regarding whether a company should be allowed to irradiate them 24/7. And as Martin Blank, former associate professor at Columbia University in the Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics once said, with EMF, we know that exposure of some kind is going to have its consequences biologically, and there will be a segment of the population that will succumb at some level. What we have to do is decide as a society, what's the level at which we want to set that? And that's a political decision. I think the scientific decision is clear, that the standards have to be looked at again and have to be reset. Thank you.
Thank you so much, April. And before we go into Frank Clegg's presentation, I just want to remind all of everyone here that please don't put your questions in the Q&A in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, Frank, we can see your display.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shelley. Well, I want to thank everyone and for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join our panel discussion this evening. I really want to talk about two things. There's a lot of misconceptions about the wireless technology and a lot of statements that are being made that I feel need to be clarified. So I'm going to do that. And then I want to talk about the impact of wireless technology in terms from a climate change standpoint. So let me get started. I have spent my entire career in the technology industry. The most recent position when I was retired as a president of Microsoft Canada. So I've seen the tremendous benefits that technology can provide. I've also seen the harm if technology is not implemented correctly. And after extensive research and analysis and talking to experts from around the world, I've come to the conclusion that our implementation of wireless technology is absolutely not safe, and I'm especially concerned about its impact on children. That's why I co-founded Canadians for Safe Technology, C4ST, almost 10 years ago now. And I'm also on the Business Advisory Group for the Environmental Health Trust, international group that is actually based in the US. I want to start with some discussion about 4 facts or statements that are being made that I think really need to be challenged. The first one is a quote that only ionizing radiation can knock electrons out of atoms and cause chemical changes. And then some physicists go on to say that is why non-ionizing radiation is not harmful. Now, you heard Margaret talk about that, and Paul Heroux out of McGill University has made some strong statements and has provided some technical information. I thought a quote from Dr. Martin Blank, who April had already mentioned. He says, what the physicists say is true, but completely irrelevant in biology. There are many ways in which living cells can and do cause chemical changes. Indeed, the cells in our bodies produce these vital chemical changes under isothermal conditions. In other words, when there is no change in temperature. The second discussion, the second phrase is, well, surely, and I've heard this from hundreds and hundreds of people, well, surely Health Canada is protecting us. In this case, I don't believe that statement applies. Health Canada has an abysmal track record in terms of keeping up with the science and the peer-reviewed public research. I've listed only a sampling of some of the items, such as asbestos, cigarette smoke, mercury, urea formaldehyde insulation, thalidomide, where it has taken decades after the original science that has been published in peer-reviewed, credible journals for Health Canada to take any kind of action. And if that isn't enough to convince you, here's what currently is on Health Canada's website when it talks about BPA. It's concluded that through food packaging uses is not expected to pose a health risk to the general population, including newborns and infants. I don't know of any parent, grandparent that I am, or niece or nephew, or aunt or uncle would dare or even think about giving a BPA bottle to a child. Third claim, while wireless infrastructure is clearly superior. Again, I don't think that statement, and in fact, it is not correct at all. I'm quoting, Reinventing Wires is a published paper by Dr. Timothy Shockley out of University of Colorado. He's a senior science research fellow with the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy out of Washington. And these are 2 quotes from his publication, Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks. First one, corporations will invariably seek the cheapest, quickest, and most profitable path, which has led to the current emphasis on wireless. As I mentioned before, I spent my career in the industry. I was fortunate enough to have a very senior position when I retired. And I can tell you firsthand, the executives that run corporations are accountable to their shareholders, period. Now, if their shareholders happen to be consumers, then they would be worried. But they are more and more driven and focused and paid and measured on the business results that they deliver quarter after quarter. So we're always looking for a cheaper, faster, better way to do it. I'm going to talk about this now, but I'll make the statement here. You will very rarely hear anybody in the industry say that their technology is safe. What they say is, we meet federal guidelines, period. Second quote from Dr. Shockley is, wireless networks and services compared to wired are inherently more complex, more costly, more unstable, and more constrained in what they can deliver. And Dr. Shockley's paper is filled with analysis, data, examples that support these statements that he is making. Final comment, here, let me give you an example too, as when I mentioned, so here is an example of CanArctic Inuit Networks, who could have chosen any sort of technology to provide increased internet service to their population in Nunavut, Nunavut. And what they decided was to run a fiber optic cable for 2,000 kilometers in the sea up to Nunavut to provide the service. And as a chief operating officer stated, we looked at every possible option and route, and we landed on what was a very realistic plan to get fiber built in the next 2 years. Final claim is that, and people make the assumption that the competitiveness of the IT industry results in the best products at the best prices. I don't believe that is true. The communications and technology industries have done an amazing job of convincing consumers and businesses that if you want to have internet access and the most current access of internet, it means you have to have wireless technology and wireless devices. They are motivated to sell you the most current data plan and the most current technology devices to keep you coming in and generating revenue. The telecommunications and communications industries and technology industries, unlike the pharmaceutical, the chemical, or the transportation industries, are not required to prove their products are safe. As I said before, all they have to do is say, we meet federal guidelines. If you have an iPhone or a cell phone device and an iPhone, it's about 5 layers down to find the warnings that tell you how far to hold that device away from your head in order to be safe, not safe, but even to meet the federal guidelines. We can debate how out of date the guidelines are, but if you hold that phone against your head, put it in your pocket, put it in your pants pocket, some women are putting in their bras, you are actually breaking the federal guidelines. There are hundreds of examples where scientists have been hired by industry to take a study that has been peer reviewed and published and actually just create another study that just basically fuddles up the process and just grinds the technical process and the evaluation process and the policy and public processes to a halt. They use, and I did this when I was in my role, you hire a third-party organization to act as your lobbyist and to be a buffer and take on tough issues that you want presented to the government or to the consumers so that you are insulated from any kind of blowback that may happen. I think the industry has done an amazing job of convincing us all there's this huge race and we have to win it and we have to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. And you know, there's been some great articles now published to say, what race is it? Who are we racing? What's the race? What's the urgency? I'll make a final point that I think there's an opportunity as consumers. If we, and our goal is to educate people so they understand that the more you use the technology, the more you understand about wireless solutions and their harm, the more you will want wired solutions, and the industry will respond. So we as consumers demand and seek out wired solutions and devices, the industry will absolutely respond. This is the same slide that Lori showed you at the beginning. What we've taken are why are we concerned? This is section 3 out of our wireless 5G guide that we have spent the last several months putting together. Lori will tell you references for that. It's on C4ST website. It's over 130 pages long. I don't expect you to read it. It is not light bedtime reading, but it's an amazing reference document. We spent a lot of time. There's hundreds of peer-reviewed research articles that are referenced. As Lori mentioned, we talked about the first four areas. I will encourage you to read through it because there are concerns about security breaches and risks to our privacy. There's a major concern about satellite impact, concerns about at least a 30% weather forecasting accuracy degradation. And we keep hearing about all the tremendous benefits about the technology and the trillions of dollars of economic growth, but we don't hear anything about the costs. I'll just say from a climate change standpoint, wired technology consumes up to 10 times less energy. It's 100 times faster, and it doesn't rely on rare minerals the way a lot of the wireless devices do. To give you an idea of the magnitude of the carbon footprint, if the cloud was a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy on the planet. In a 3-year period from 2012 to 2015, the forecasted wireless cloud increase, just the increase in the cloud footprint was the equivalent of putting 4.9 million automobiles on the road. And finally, there's research and materials now starting to be written to say, yes, we know there's a tremendous energy hog from the devices and keeping the cell phones and tablets going. There's forecasts now that the data that's being stored from these devices is actually larger than the growth in data from the devices themselves. and the industry is going out and signing these power deals with our local governments, getting locked in at very cost-effective rates, and we as taxpayers may be carrying the brunt of that as the demands increase and the costs increase. So that's my end. I thank you again for your time. And Lori, I pass it back to you as our moderator for closing remarks and comments about our reference material. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you all very much for allowing us to share this important information with you. If you would like more information and/or details, please go to the C4ST and Prevent Cancer Now websites and/or email Frank Clegg. Let's all make green and safe technology choices. Wired is wiser. Now for the question and answer portion of our panel session, thank you to Shelley Wright for moderating for us.
Well, Lori, I don't see any questions here. I've checked the chat and you've answered one of the questions. And I don't see anything else. Does anyone else see a question that could be posed? I'm looking for hands. And it looks like no hands today. Awesome. That was just a great presentation, everyone. Thank you.
I'd like to apologize for not showing my slides. I hope as a conference organizer, that's a real rookie mistake, but I don't get to be in the front and be a speaker very often. So I apologize.
And I don't get to be a moderator often. So yes, April, you did a fabulous job. And since we don't have any questions, if you wanted to display and just share a little bit.
I've got something that I would have, if I was giving a talk on people, humans, that I would have shown it, is that when people want to get information on Safety Code 6, then they should bypass what is on the Health Canada website and the ISED website and go straight to Safety Code 6. And the one place that you should look at is Table 5. So if you look at Table 5, this is the frequencies for wireless radiation that we use in telecommunications. It's from 300 to 6,000 megahertz. And then if you just scan across, you don't have to be a mathematician for this or a physicist. You can see it's only 6-minute exposure. So it's in Safety Code 6, but there's no mention of that short duration. So anyway, we need to bring that to people's attention. And the other thing to look for is the average. So instead of looking at the peaks, they look at a time span and then they average it. So people often respond, humans and animals and living organisms respond to the pulses, to the peaks. So anyway, we've got lots more to talk about for Safety Code 6, but go right there.
I do see a question here, Mark McKenzie. I'm just going to make sure you can speak now. It looks like you're unmuted.
Thanks, Shelley, and thanks very much for this presentation. Just for some background information, I was a board member on Prevent Cancer Now. So hello, Mark, nice to see you again, and Frank. So my concern in this issue has been many. I'm happy to live in the country away from all these cell towers, and I'm shocked when I go into the city and notice how many more there are here and there, and I'm quite familiar with all of the data that's been presented. But my question is in schools, and when I was with Prevent Cancer Now, we were talking a lot about schools. And it's my understanding that some of the highest levels of radiation that can be experienced anywhere is in a classroom, because they have a lot of the learning is going towards everybody having their own wireless device and pulling up their next lesson and watching a YouTube or whatever they're doing on their device. 20, 30 kids in one classroom, all with that many devices, and the number of hot spots in the ceiling and whatnot produces far more radiation than they experience at home. I know there was a push to get schools wired, and on the basis of this information and concern, and I'm just wondering if there's much progress being made on getting schools wired.
Well, I like to try to answer that question a little bit. As the director of Canadian Educators for Safe Technology, I'm working very hard with educational advisors across Canada to work on raising awareness with school boards and promoting safe tech. And there's a number of teachers across Canada who are actually doing safe tech in their classrooms and downloading data ahead of time and getting children to put their devices in airplane mode and just working on strategies that they can do right now to minimize risks and exposures. And we are working with, we will hopefully work with school boards in the future to have safe tech practices in the curriculum and to develop better strategies that use Ethernet adapters and things in classrooms. I do know from my classroom, I was able to get accommodations at some level and use an Ethernet wire my teacher network book using an Ethernet cable. And I encourage children to use all their devices in airplane mode. So there is some progress done, but we certainly have more things we can do in the classroom. And speaking to senators, writing our concerns at different levels of government, speaking with parents and that kind of a thing. We can just share the word at ETFO annual AGMs. A number of us presented resolutions, safe tech resolutions, and we have the unions understand a little bit more about this necessity, but we still need to push it more. So thank
Shelley,
you.
I see there's another question.
Yes, I do too. Thank you, Mark.
So
Mark, Mark De Bruin, you have a question as well. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Shelley.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for a wonderful presentation. I think it's so important. You'll see by the background that I'm actually a supposed support person here with the Green Party. Yeah, further to what you were saying, Shelley, I retired as a teacher, a high school teacher, a number of years ago. And I sure remember that I wasn't even out of my classroom when my blackboards were being removed to be replaced by whiteboards. And I was the last teacher in the school to hold out. I had been watching these go in and seeing how they worked. And I had been discovering that when Wi-Fi had been installed in the school a year or two earlier, my wired connections were ripped out without asking. They were just removed. Wireless was put in. And I started experiencing incredible burning pains in the soles of my feet at the end of each day as I was driving home. And it took a while to start suspecting there was a connection. Anyway, I held out, and as soon as I retired, boom, everything went wireless. So that was a few years ago now, but I don't think things have progressed really that far yet. There's such an infatuation with the cool factor of things like whiteboards and all those wireless technologies and education. And as a teacher, I just could not see the advantage to learning, that it really enhanced learning for kids. Learning is mostly about relationships between teachers and kids and so on, not about technology. So it's a huge job, and I really want to applaud you and thank you for the work you're doing in the education world specifically.
Thank you. Now
Sorry, I just want to finish with saying the reason I actually raised my hand initially was to remind everybody who's on this panel or this call, this room, they're mostly Greens, that the Green Party has got two policies relating specifically to this whole issue that are going to be discussed and voted on in the next couple of days. And I really encourage people to be present for those, to vote in favor of them. We would be the only federal party, I think the only party anywhere with any kind of solid policy around trying to bring change to how we regulate and view this wireless industry. No other party is even talking about it. So they're important to us and they're important to Canada. And I just wanted to put that plug in as a Green. Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent plug. That was perfect. And it would be great to see that happen, wouldn't it?
Thanks a lot, everybody. This has been fantastic. And I really appreciate everything that's been going on this entire afternoon for the wonderful panels that we have had. First starting off with electoral reform panel and then moving on to Ukraine and now green and safe tech. It's been a wonderful start to GreenTalks, and I wanted to thank you all. This is apparently the policy side ended early, so we're the only ones left for the evening. So, but I'm very pleased that so many of you stuck around to hear the GreenTalks part. We're beginning first thing tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on the GreenTalks side with a virtual tour of Xinhuak Residential School. And the policy side is starting at 11:30 Eastern, 8:30 Pacific. So if you are on the Pacific side and get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, please join us for the GreenTalks. And if not, then please head on to the policy side. Thank you once again for being here this evening. And we're also on YouTube, as well as the session is recorded. So if you missed anything because of policy, don't worry about it. You can capture it again. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Allison, for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.